The moment my identical twin called me crying, I knew something was terribly wrong, but I never imagined that 30 years of his life had been quietly controlled by the woman he loved. If stories about betrayal, family, and satisfying karma are your kind of stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now let me tell you what happened. I hadn't heard my brother Ethan cry since we were 12 years old. Back then, we'd been standing outside our parents' garage after our dog died. He didn't make a sound, just tears rolling down his face while he stared at the empty leash. 45 years later, I heard that same silence between his breaths. Daniel. His voice cracked. I don't know who I am anymore. I froze. Ethan? What's happened? Nothing. Only breathing. Then another quiet sob. I think she's been controlling my entire life. Those words settled into my chest like concrete. I sat down at my kitchen table without realizing it. What do you mean? I can't explain it over the phone. He whispered something else. I just need you. That sentence hit harder than anything else. We weren't the kind of brothers who called each other every day. Life had pulled us into different states years ago. I lived outside Denver, Colorado, where I'd retired after spending 30 years as an insurance investigator. Ethan still lived in Columbus, Ohio. We saw each other twice a year. Birthdays if we were lucky. Christmas almost always. But being identical twins creates something strange. You can go months without talking, then hear one sentence, and know something is deeply wrong. I'll catch the first flight. No. His answer came too quickly. I don't want her knowing. Her. He didn't even say his wife's name. Linda. The woman he'd married when we were both 25. The woman everyone believed was organized, responsible, protective. The woman who smiled in every family photograph. The woman who always insisted she was only looking out for Ethan. I suddenly remembered something our mother used to say. Linda answers questions I asked Ethan. At the time we'd laughed. Now it didn't seem funny. The next afternoon, Ethan picked me up from the airport. For a second, I almost didn't recognize him. Not because he'd aged. We both had gray hair, wrinkles, reading glasses. That wasn't it. It was his posture. My brother had always walked with his shoulders back. Now they curled inward, as if apologizing for taking up space. When he hugged me, I felt how tense he was. You okay? He nodded automatically, then immediately shook his head. No. We drove in silence for nearly 20 minutes. Finally he spoke. Do you remember senior year? What about it? When coach offered me the college baseball scholarship. Of course. You remember why I turned it down? I smiled. You wanted to stay close to home. He looked over at me. No. I wanted to go. I stared back. What? I never changed my mind. He tightened both hands around the steering wheel. Linda convinced me I wasn't good enough. I frowned. You weren't even dating then. We just started. He laughed bitterly. She said moving away would ruin our future. I searched my memory. I remembered him saying almost exactly that. Except, had those been his words? Or hers? He continued. That was the first major decision she made for me. Decision. Not advice. Decision. The distinction made my stomach tighten. His house looked exactly as I remembered. Perfect lawn. Fresh paint. Flower beds trimmed with military precision. Everything looked managed. Inside, nothing had changed in years. The same beige furniture. The same framed family portraits. The same carefully arranged shelves. It felt less like a home, more like a museum. Linda wasn't there. She's visiting her sister, Ethan said. We have about 4 hours. He led me downstairs, into his workshop, or what used to be his workshop. The woodworking tools I'd given him over the years sat untouched beneath layers of dust. I picked up the oak-handled chisel I'd engraved with his initials 20 years earlier. Still sharp. Never used. I thought you loved building furniture. He looked away. I do. So why'd you stop? Linda said it was messy. I laughed. He didn't. Then I noticed something else. Every cabinet was labeled. Every drawer. Every storage box. Not in Ethan's handwriting. Linda's. Even the shelves had instructions. Sanding. Approved paint. Seasonal items. Nothing belonged to him. Everything belonged to her system. I slowly turned toward him. How bad is it? He didn't answer. Instead, he opened a filing cabinet. Inside were dozens of folders. One labeled personal spending. Another, approved purchases. Another, weekly allowances. I blinked. Ethan. He handed me one folder. Inside were handwritten notes. Coffee. Approved. Haircut. Approved. Golf with coworkers. Denied. Replacement work boots. Delay until next quarter. Birthday gift for mom. Excessive. I looked up. What is this? My life. His voice barely rose above a whisper. I've earned six figures for almost 30 years. He swallowed hard. I had to ask permission to spend $30. A cold feeling spread through my chest. Financial abuse. I had investigated cases like this before retirement, usually involving elderly parents. Never someone as capable as my own brother. Then he said something that chilled me even more. I didn't even realize it was abuse. That evening, Linda came home. She walked through the front door, carrying shopping bags. Her smile appeared instantly. Oh my goodness. She hugged me. It's been forever. Everything about her seemed warm, natural, practiced. Daniel, you look wonderful. You too. She laughed. I've been trying to keep your brother alive. She said it jokingly. Everyone laughed. Except Ethan. I noticed something tiny. When Linda spoke, Ethan looked at her before answering any question, almost as if checking whether his response was acceptable. Years as an investigator taught me to notice habits. That one wasn't normal. Dinner confirmed everything. Ethan doesn't eat spicy food. I do. Linda smiled. No, sweetheart, remember? It upsets your stomach. He immediately nodded. Right. Except I remembered. When we were kids, he put hot sauce on everything. Later she said, Ethan hates road trips. False. He doesn't enjoy seafood. Also false. He prefers staying home. Another lie. Each statement erased a piece of who he'd once been. Not through arguments. Not through shouting. Through repetition. Correction. Replacement. Identity rewritten one sentence at a time. I watched my brother disappear in real time. And I realized something far more disturbing. He didn't even notice it anymore. After dinner, Linda stepped outside to answer a phone call. I leaned toward Ethan. Why don't you ever correct her? He stared at his plate. I used to. What happened? He answered without looking up. It was easier to agree. Those 7 words explained 30 years. But what I discovered a few minutes later would prove this wasn't simply an overbearing marriage. It was something far more calculated. And it would force me to make an offer that neither of us ever imagined. Linda came back inside smiling as if nothing in the world could possibly be wrong. She placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. There you are. I leave for 5 minutes and you two are already whispering. She laughed. I forced myself to laugh with her. Old twin secrets. She grinned. I've never been able to tell you two apart. That sentence lingered in my mind much longer than it should have. She couldn't tell us apart. Neither could most people. Even at 55, we still looked nearly identical. I was slightly leaner. Ethan's hair had a little more gray. But unless someone knew us well, they guessed. Linda disappeared into the kitchen. The second she was out of sight, Ethan whispered, Meet me in the garage at 6 tomorrow morning. Before she wakes up? He nodded. She never gets up before 7. I barely slept. Every conversation from dinner replayed through my mind. Not because of what Linda had said, but because of what Ethan hadn't. He never disagreed. Never offered an opinion. Never finished a sentence without looking at her first. I'd spent 3 decades investigating insurance fraud. People reveal themselves through patterns. And I was beginning to recognize one I'd seen before. Control doesn't always arrive with screaming. Sometimes it arrives wearing kindness. At exactly 6 the next morning, I slipped into the garage. Ethan was already there, coffee in one hand, a thick cardboard box beside him. I've been waiting to show someone this. He opened the box. Inside were dozens of journals, old calendars, folders, receipts, birthday cards, Christmas letters, even grocery lists. I looked at him. You kept all this. I wasn't keeping it. He smiled sadly. Linda was. He handed me one journal. Every page was filled with neat handwriting. Not Ethan's. Linda's. January 14th. Ethan forgot to pay the electric bill. Reminded him. January 16th. Suggested navy shirt instead of green. Green makes him look tired. January 21st. Discouraged him from accepting overtime. Family comes first. February 2nd. Talked him out of buying woodworking equipment. Waste of money. I turned another page. Another. Another. Every entry described Ethan almost like a project. Not a husband. A project. She wrote this every day? For years. I looked up. Did you ever read these before? He shook his head. I found them 2 months ago. What changed? My doctor. That surprised me. What do you mean? I went for my annual physical. So? He asked a simple question. Ethan stared across the garage. What hobbies help you relax? I couldn't answer. He gave a hollow laugh. I honestly couldn't think of one. The doctor waited, then asked another question. What do you enjoy doing just for yourself? I couldn't answer that either. Silence filled the garage. My doctor referred me to a therapist. I nodded slowly. And the therapist said something I'll never forget. His eyes watered. It sounds like you've spent years becoming the version of yourself someone else preferred. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Because deep down, we both knew it was true. Around lunchtime, Linda suggested we all go shopping. I want to show Daniel the new outlet mall. Ethan instinctively reached for his wallet. Linda gently stopped him. I've got it. It looked sweet. Until I noticed what happened next. She opened his wallet, removed 3 credit cards, placed 2 back, kept 1, then handed him $20. In case you need coffee. She smiled as though she were doing him a favor. Nobody else in the restaurant would have noticed. I did. Control disguised as care. The mall gave me another piece of the puzzle. Every time Ethan wandered towards something he liked. Books, camping gear, woodworking supplies. Linda redirected him. You don't really need that. You've never been interested in that. Remember? Remember. That word kept appearing. Except the memories she referred to weren't true. At one point, Ethan stopped beside a display of fishing rods. His eyes stayed there longer than anywhere else. You used to fish every weekend, I said. Linda answered before he could. Oh, that phase ended years ago. Ethan quietly stepped away. But I noticed something. His fingers brushed one of the rods. Just for a second. Like someone touching a photograph from another life. That evening my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. I'm looking for Daniel Carter. This is Daniel. My name is Rebecca. She hesitated. I used to work with Ethan. Something in her tone made me walk outside. What can I do for you? I heard you're visiting. Yes. I don't want to interfere. Another pause. But someone should know the truth. My pulse quickened. What truth? I watched your brother change over 25 years. She sounded heartbroken. The Ethan I worked with loved mentoring new employees. He organized fishing trips. He made everyone laugh. What happened? The day Linda started bringing him lunch every afternoon. Everything slowly disappeared. I frowned. What do you mean? She answered his phone. She chose who he ate lunch with. She discouraged friendships. She'd arrive unexpectedly if co-workers invited him somewhere after work. Within 5 years, nobody called anymore. Not because they disliked Ethan. Because they assumed Linda would say no. Rebecca sighed. I always wondered if he even knew it was happening. After hanging up, I stood outside for nearly 10 minutes. This wasn't just happening at home. It had happened everywhere. Little by little. Year after year. The next morning, Ethan unlocked a small safe hidden behind old paint cans. I've never shown anyone this. Inside was a faded envelope. It was addressed to him. Postmarked 28 years earlier. Never opened. What is it? My acceptance letter. For what? He swallowed. The baseball scholarship. I stared. You still have it? He nodded. I never opened it. Why? He looked ashamed. Linda said there wasn't any point. My hands tightened around the envelope. Open it. I can't. Why not? I'm afraid. Of what? Finding out who I could have been. His voice broke. That sentence hit harder than anything else he'd said. Because it wasn't about baseball. It was about an entire life. A life he never got to choose. Slowly, he handed me the envelope. I want you to read it. I carefully unfolded the yellowed paper. It confirmed everything. Full scholarship. Housing included. A chance to play for one of Ohio's best college programs. The opportunity had been real. It hadn't been a dream. It had been a future. One quietly buried. That afternoon, we sat in the backyard while Linda visited another neighbor. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Ethan asked, Can I ask you something? Anything. If our lives had been reversed, would you have let someone do this to you? I answered honestly. I don't know. He looked surprised. I'd like to believe I'd have fought. I looked him in the eye. But control rarely starts with chains. It starts with tiny compromises. He nodded. One decision. One apology. One sacrifice. And then another. Until one day, you can't remember where your own voice went. A tear rolled down his cheek. I want it back. For the first time since I'd arrived, I saw something different. Not defeat. Determination. Small. Fragile. But real. And that's when an idea crossed my mind. A ridiculous. Impossible. Potentially life-changing idea. I looked at my identical twin. then toward the kitchen window where Linda was moving around the house. Finally, I said the words that would change everything. What if? I leaned closer. We let her believe she's still controlling you. But for a few days, it isn't you. Ethan stared at me. Neither of us spoke. Then, very slowly, a smile appeared on his face. It was the first genuine smile I'd seen from my brother in years. And it told me he was thinking exactly what I was. Maybe, just maybe, it was time for the woman who had spent 30 years controlling every move to discover what happened when she was no longer controlling the right twin. Neither of us spoke for almost a full minute after I suggested the switch. The only sound was the breeze moving through the maple tree behind Ethan's patio. Finally, he let out a nervous laugh. That's crazy. It is. It'll never work. Probably not. We looked at each other. Then we both smiled. Because identical twins have always shared one dangerous habit. The more impossible an idea sounded, the more tempting it became. I don't want revenge, Ethan said quietly. I know. I want to know something. What? If I suddenly acted like myself, would she even recognize me? That question stayed with me. It wasn't about fooling Linda. It was about discovering whether she still knew the man she'd married, or only the version she'd spent 30 years creating. The next morning, an opportunity appeared on its own. Linda walked into the kitchen carrying her phone. My sister called. She's having trouble with her basement again. She rolled her eyes. I'll probably be gone most of the afternoon. She kissed Ethan on the cheek. I'll text you a grocery list. She turned to me. Daniel, make sure your brother doesn't spend the day filling the garage with junk. She laughed. I smiled politely. I'll keep an eye on him. The front door closed. We waited. 1 minute. 2. 5. Only after Ethan watched her car disappear down the street did he whisper. Now. People think identical twins can simply exchange clothes and become each other. Real life isn't that simple. We spent nearly 2 hours preparing. Ethan showed me how he stood, how he folded his arms, which watch he always wore. He parted his hair slightly differently than I did. He wore his wedding ring on a slightly looser fit because arthritis had changed his knuckles. Even his glasses had a tiny scratch in the upper right corner. She'll notice if those aren't on, he said. What about your voice? He shrugged. We've always sounded alike. We practiced anyway. Not because of the words. Because of the pauses. Ethan answered questions slowly. He hesitated before disagreeing. He almost apologized before speaking. I refused to copy that part. If I'm pretending to be you, I said, I'm pretending to be the version you used to be. He looked at me uncertainly. She'll notice. Good. Before Linda returned, we agreed on one rule. No cruelty. No humiliation. No lies that couldn't be corrected. The goal wasn't to punish her. It was to expose the truth. If her behavior only worked because Ethan had stopped pushing back, then a few small changes would reveal everything. If we were wrong, we'd end the experiment immediately. Ethan nodded. I can live with that. Then he surprised me. No. What? I can finally live. At 3:30, Linda's SUV pulled into the driveway. Ethan quietly slipped out the back door and headed toward my rental car parked around the corner. He'd spend the night in a nearby hotel under my name. I'd stay here, as Ethan, for 24 hours. Maybe 48 if it worked. The front door opened. I'm home. I took one slow breath. Here we go. She walked into the kitchen carrying grocery bags. Without looking at me, she said, I texted you 3 times. I know. You didn't answer. I was busy. She stopped unpacking, slowly turned around. What were you busy with? I shrugged. Reading. A tiny wrinkle appeared between her eyebrows. Normally, according to Ethan, he would have immediately apologized, explained, justified himself. Instead, I poured myself another cup of coffee. Nothing more. She watched me for several seconds, then smiled. Oh, well, next time answer. Sure. Her expression lingered a moment longer. Confused. Not all. Just confused. The first real test came an hour later. Dinner. Linda placed grilled chicken on my plate. No hot sauce. I reached into the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle, covered my food with it. She stared. I thought you stopped eating spicy food years ago. I tasted a bite. Still loved it. I guess I missed it. Silence. You'll regret that. We'll see. She didn't say another word, but she barely touched her own dinner. Instead, she watched me, studying, comparing, trying to solve a puzzle she didn't yet understand. Later that evening, she handed me a small notepad. I made your schedule for tomorrow. I glanced at it. Hardware store. Bank. Haircut. Pick up dry cleaning. Call insurance company. Lunch at exactly 12:15. Every hour of the day was planned. I looked up. What if I don't feel like doing this? She blinked. What? What if I have other plans? She laughed as though I'd made a joke. What plans? I don't know. I'll decide tomorrow. The smile disappeared from her face. You don't usually do that. Maybe I should. Another pause. Then, are you upset with me? Interesting. Not angry. Not defensive. She immediately assumed something was wrong, as though independent thought could only come from conflict. No, I'm just deciding for myself. She looked away. I'll rewrite the list. No need. I folded the paper, put it in my pocket. Whether I followed it or not would be my choice. Around 9 that evening, my phone vibrated. It was Ethan. How's it going? I typed back. She's noticed small things. Nothing major yet. A reply came almost immediately. I feel guilty. I smiled sadly. That sounded exactly like my brother. I answered. Feeling guilty for making one decision on your own tells you how deep this goes. Several minutes passed. Then another message appeared. You're right. I never saw it until now. The following morning, I intentionally broke another routine. Instead of waiting for Linda to tell me what to wear, I chose an old denim shirt Ethan had loved years ago. When I walked downstairs, she frowned. I thought we donated that. I found it. It doesn't really suit you anymore. I like it. She stared at me. You've never cared about clothes. I care today. Again. Silence. She looked genuinely unsettled. Not because of the shirt. Because of the confidence. At breakfast, she slid a stack of household bills toward me. I need you to sign these. I read them carefully. One payment caught my attention. A landscaping service charging nearly $900 every month. The yard was beautiful, but not that beautiful. Another invoice listed a home organization consultant. $300 every month. I casually asked, do we still use this company? Linda answered too quickly. Yes. What do they do? They organize. I looked around the spotless kitchen. It already seems organized. Her smile tightened. It keeps everything running smoothly. I signed nothing. I'll read these first. Her eyes widened. You've never read them. Maybe I should have. That afternoon, the doorbell rang. A delivery driver stood outside with several shopping bags. Package for Mrs. Carter. I signed. Carried everything inside. Luxury handbags. Designer shoes. Jewelry. Thousands of dollars worth. Linda walked in from the backyard. Oh good. She reached for the bags. I looked at the invoices. These are expensive. They were on sale. I almost laughed. One handbag alone cost more than the woodworking equipment Ethan had been told was a waste of money. I looked at her calmly. Interesting priorities. She froze. What does that mean? It means. I gently placed the receipt on the counter. I think we should review our household budget together. Her face lost all color. Not because I'd accused her. Because, for the first time in 30 years, Ethan had asked a question she couldn't easily redirect. She opened her mouth, closed it again, then quietly said, We've never needed to do that. I held her gaze. Maybe we do now. That evening, after she went upstairs, I stepped onto the back porch and called Ethan. He answered immediately. How bad? Worse than we thought. What happened? She isn't reacting to anger. She's reacting to independence. There was silence on the line. Then Ethan whispered, So, she never wanted a partner. I looked through the kitchen window. Linda was standing alone at the sink, staring into space. I said slowly. She wanted certainty. And certainty is slipping away. Before hanging up, I added one more sentence. Tomorrow, I'm going to ask to see every financial account. Ethan didn't answer for several seconds. Finally, he said, If she refuses, we'll know exactly what she's been protecting. And neither of us realized that before tomorrow morning arrived, someone else would unexpectedly show up at the house with information neither of us had been looking for. Information that would change our understanding of Linda's motives forever. I barely slept that night. Not because I was worried about getting caught. Because I already had my answer. Linda wasn't reacting to a different face. She was reacting to different boundaries. That realization mattered more than our little experiment ever could. At 7 the next morning, there was a knock at the front door. Linda looked through the window. Oh, she seemed surprised. It's Carol. Carol was the widow who lived 2 houses down. She came inside carrying a loaf of banana bread wrapped in a kitchen towel. I heard Daniel was visiting, she said with a warm smile. Then she looked at me. For a second I thought you were Ethan. I laughed. That happens. Carol smiled politely at Linda before turning back to me. You boys used to make this neighborhood crazy when you were kids. Linda forced a laugh. Carol's expression softened. I still remember when Ethan first moved in. You do? I asked. Oh yes. He built that little bench out back for my husband after his knee surgery. I glanced toward the backyard. I didn't know that. Carol looked confused. You didn't? She frowned slightly. He used to spend every Saturday building something. Planters, birdhouses, shelves. Then she stopped talking, almost as if she'd realized something. I haven't seen him work with wood in, goodness, 20 years. She smiled awkwardly. Anyway, I just wanted to say hello. After she left, the house became strangely quiet. Linda busied herself wiping a perfectly clean counter. She didn't look at me. I forgot about those little projects. Her voice sounded distant. So did Ethan. She finally turned. What do you mean? I mean, everyone remembers the man he used to be. For a moment, I thought she was going to argue. Instead, she whispered, people change. Sometimes. I held her gaze. And sometimes they're changed. Those words hung between us. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. 10 minutes later, the front door opened again. This time, it was Ethan. He walked in carrying an overnight bag. Linda's eyes widened. She looked at him, then at me, then back again. What? Her voice caught. What is going on? I took a slow breath. It's over. She stared. The experiment. Her face turned pale. What experiment? Ethan stepped beside me. For 2 days, he said quietly, you weren't talking to the husband you thought you were. The room fell silent. Linda looked from one twin to the other, trying to tell us apart. For the first time in 30 years. She couldn't. You switched places? There was no anger in her voice. Only disbelief. Ethan nodded. We needed to know something. Linda folded her arms. What? He answered with heartbreaking honesty. Whether you'd notice me becoming myself again. She blinked. I don't understand. I think you do. He pulled a chair away from the table and sat down. For once, he didn't wait for permission. I've spent 30 years believing I was difficult, forgetful, bad with money, indecisive. He looked directly at her. But every person I've spoken to this week remembers someone completely different. Linda opened her mouth, closed it. I never meant. He gently interrupted. I believe you. That surprised both of us. I believe you didn't wake up one morning planning to control me. He took a deep breath. But intention doesn't erase impact. A tear rolled down Linda's cheek. I was trying to keep everything together. I know. My father wasted money. I know. My mother never planned anything. I know. My childhood was chaos. Ethan nodded slowly. And somewhere along the way, you decided the only way to feel safe was to make every decision yourself. Linda sat down across from him. For the first time since I'd arrived, she looked frightened. Not of us. Of herself. I thought I was helping. Ethan's voice softened. You were. At first. Then helping became deciding. Deciding became correcting. And correcting became controlling. The tears came faster now. I didn't see it. I didn't either. That was the tragedy. Neither of them had noticed when care quietly turned into control. And now, after 30 years, they were finally saying it out loud. Nobody spoke for several minutes. The clock above the stove ticked loudly enough to make the silence feel even heavier. Finally, Linda looked at Ethan. What happens now? For 30 years, she had been the one asking the questions and expecting immediate answers. This time, Ethan didn't rush. He folded his hands together and thought before speaking. I honestly don't know. It was the first time I'd heard him admit uncertainty without apologizing for it. I know one thing, he continued. I can't go back to living the way I have. Linda nodded slowly, tears still in her eyes. I understand. No, Ethan replied gently. I don't think you do. Not yet. He stood and walked toward the garage. A minute later, he returned carrying the dusty woodworking chisel I'd given him years earlier. He set it on the kitchen table. Do you remember this? Linda looked at it. You bought that? No. My brother gave it to me 20 years ago. She looked confused. I've never seen it. Exactly. He smiled sadly. Because I stopped coming out here. Linda lowered her eyes. That afternoon, Ethan suggested something neither of us expected. I want us to meet with a financial planner. Linda looked surprised. And a marriage counselor. She nodded again. No arguments. No conditions. If we're going to save this marriage, he said, it has to be based on honesty, not habits. For the first time since I'd arrived, Linda didn't try to redirect the conversation. She simply said, okay. 2 days later, the three of us sat in the office of a financial planner. Stacks of statements covered the conference table. The planner, a calm woman in her 60s, spent nearly an hour reviewing their accounts. Finally, she looked up. I don't see evidence that anyone has been stealing money. Linda let out a breath she'd clearly been holding. But, the planner continued, I do see that nearly every financial decision has been made by one spouse. She turned toward Ethan. Were you comfortable with that arrangement? He answered honestly. I thought I was. And now? I realize I stopped participating years ago. The planner nodded. That happens more often than people think. She slid a blank legal pad toward them. From today forward, every major financial decision requires both of your signatures. Linda didn't argue. Instead, she quietly wrote the date at the top of the page. It was a small gesture, but it was the first shared decision I'd seen them make. That evening, Ethan unlocked the workshop. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows. He stood there for a long moment. I forgot how this place smells. Wood, oil, fresh-cut pine. It smelled like the brother I'd grown up with. He picked up an old measuring tape. Then the chisel. Without saying another word, he cleared a space on the workbench. I grabbed a broom. For the next 3 hours, we worked side by side. Neither of us talked much. We didn't have to. Some conversations happened through shared work. As we swept away years of dust, it felt like Ethan was doing the same thing inside himself. Before I flew back to Colorado, Ethan drove me to the airport. The same man who had picked me up days earlier seemed different. Not louder, not tougher, just lighter. At the drop-off lane, he turned off the engine. I've been thinking about something. What? I kept saying Linda took my life away. He paused. That wasn't completely true. I waited. I stopped fighting for it. I nodded, recognizing that doesn't excuse what happened. I know, but it means I have a choice now. He smiled. And that's something I haven't felt in a very long time. I reached across the center console and squeezed his shoulder. You've got the rest of your life. He laughed. You sound like Dad. I'll take that as a compliment. As I walked toward the terminal, I looked back once. Ethan wasn't staring at the steering wheel anymore. He was looking straight ahead. For the first time in years, he looked like a man driving toward his own future. 3 months passed before I returned to Ohio. This time, Ethan didn't sound defeated when he called. Come see the workshop, he said. That's all you're going to tell me. He laughed. You'll understand when you get here. It was the strongest I'd heard his voice in years. The garage door rolled open before I even got out of my rental car. I stopped in my tracks. The workshop looked alive again. Fresh lumber leaned against one wall. A new workbench stood in the center of the room. Every tool had a place, not because someone had labeled it, but because Ethan had arranged it himself. On one shelf sat 3 finished rocking horses. Another held handcrafted cutting boards. Near the window was a dining table, still unfinished. Ethan caught me looking. It's for Carol, the neighbor. He nodded. Her granddaughter is getting married. You made this? He smiled. I did. Then he said something that made me unexpectedly emotional. It's the first thing I've built in 23 years. I pulled him into a hug. You were always good at this. He shook his head. I forgot. No, I said. You were made to forget. Later that evening, Linda joined us on the back patio with 3 glasses of iced tea. She looked different. Not physically. Calmer. Less hurried. There was no clipboard. No schedule. No list of things Ethan needed to do. She sat quietly before speaking. I've been seeing my own therapist. Ethan looked at her with genuine curiosity. How's it going? She gave a tired smile. Hard. I keep realizing how often I mistake control for love. Nobody interrupted her. My father never let anyone make decisions, she continued. I promised myself I'd never live in chaos again. She looked down at her hands. I didn't realize I became the person I feared. Ethan reached across the table. Not to rescue her. Not to erase the past. Simply to acknowledge what she'd said. Thank you for telling me. It wasn't forgiveness. It was honesty. And honesty was something neither of them had practiced in a long time. The biggest change came 6 months later. Ethan invited the entire family to Thanksgiving. For as long as anyone could remember, Linda had planned every detail. This year, Ethan made the menu. He asked everyone what they wanted to bring. He even insisted on cooking the turkey himself. When dinner was ready, our niece laughed. "Uncle Ethan, I forgot how funny you are." The room went quiet. Ethan smiled. "So did I." Everyone laughed. Even Linda. There was sadness in her smile, but there was also acceptance. She knew exactly what that sentence meant. As the evening wound down, Ethan walked me out to my car. "You know what the strangest part is?" he asked. "What?" "I spent years waiting for some dramatic moment that would change my life." He looked back toward the house, where laughter drifted through the open windows. It wasn't one moment. It was hundreds of tiny decisions. Learning to say what I wanted. Reading the bills before signing them. Buying a piece of wood without asking permission. Calling an old friend. Making breakfast because I felt like pancakes. He laughed. "It sounds ridiculous." "It doesn't," I said. "It sounds like freedom." He nodded. "I used to think karma meant watching someone else suffer." He looked toward the house again. "Now I think real karma is this. When someone spends years trying to control another person's life, they eventually have to watch that person become independent. They can't stop it. They can't rewrite it. They can only decide whether they'll grow with it or be left behind." I smiled. That's a lesson worth remembering. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Ethan was standing in his driveway, not looking lost, not looking for approval, just standing comfortable. Why in his own skin? It struck me that my brother hadn't needed me to save him. He needed someone to remind him that the person he'd once been had never truly disappeared. He'd simply been waiting for the courage to come home. Winter arrived early that year. A heavy snow covered Columbus just a week after Thanksgiving. I was halfway through shoveling my driveway in Colorado when my phone rang. It was Ethan. "You busy?" "Not anymore." He laughed. "I've got news." There was something different about his voice. Not excitement. Confidence. The kind that doesn't need to announce itself. "Remember the cutting boards I made? The ones in your workshop? I put a few online. How'd they do?" "They sold." "That's great." I thought it was luck. He paused. "So I made 10 more. And they sold too." I smiled. "I always told you people would pay for quality." "You did. And I never believed you." By spring, Ethan's garage had become more than a workshop. It had become a gathering place. Every other Saturday, a handful of neighbors stopped by. Some wanted help repairing old furniture. Others simply wanted to learn. Carol came almost every week. One afternoon, she looked around the workshop and laughed. "I haven't seen this much life in here since your first summer in the neighborhood." Ethan smiled. "I guess I was overdue." Not everything was easy. One evening Linda called me. "I need some advice." "What about?" I keep catching myself. "Catching yourself?" I'll start to answer a question for Ethan. And then I realized nobody asked me. She sounded embarrassed. I never knew how often I did it. "Old habits take time," I said. "They do. I just don't want to become that person again." I appreciated something about that conversation. She wasn't asking how to make Ethan change. She was asking how to change herself. That was a very different question. A few weeks later, Ethan invited me to a local craft fair. "I want you to see something." Rows of handmade furniture lined the community center. At the far end sat Ethan's booth. Simple wooden signs, serving trays, rocking horses, coffee tables. Nothing flashy, just honest work. I watched people stop, run their hands across the grain, ask questions. One older man bought a handcrafted bench. As he carried it away, he turned back. "You've got a gift." Ethan thanked him. After the customer left, he stood quietly for a moment. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded. "I've spent years wondering whether I had anything valuable left to offer." He looked around at the empty spaces where his work had been. "I guess I do." That afternoon, something happened that neither of us expected. A young man in his early 30s approached the booth. He introduced himself as Michael. "I don't know if you remember me." Ethan frowned. "I'm sorry. You coached my Little League team." Recognition spread across Ethan's face. "Michael." The man laughed. "You taught me how to throw a curveball. I still remember something you told me." Ethan looked puzzled. "I said a lot back then." Michael smiled. "You told me confidence isn't something people give you. It's something you build." There was a long silence. Finally, Michael added, "I've repeated that to my own son." After he walked away, Ethan looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I don't even remember saying it." "I believe you did." He laughed softly. I stopped listening to my own advice. On my last night in Ohio, the three of us sat on the back porch watching the sunset. Nobody felt the need to fill every silence anymore. Linda broke it first. "I owe you an apology, Daniel." You don't owe me anything. I do. She looked directly at me. When you first came here, I thought you were interfering in our marriage. She smiled sadly. Now I realize you were giving Ethan something I should have protected years ago. What was that? A chance to be heard. Ethan reached over and squeezed her hand. Not because everything was perfect, because both of them had learned that respect wasn't about always agreeing. It was about making room for the other person's voice. As darkness settled over the backyard, I realized something. The greatest act of karma hadn't been exposing years of control. It had been watching my brother slowly reclaim pieces of himself. One conversation, one decision, one ordinary day at a time. And somehow, those ordinary days had become the most extraordinary victory of all. The real test came almost a year after Ethan called me in tears. It wasn't another argument. It wasn't a financial crisis. It wasn't even about Linda. It was about our mother's house. After Mom passed away, my brother and I inherited the little place where we'd grown up. It wasn't worth a fortune, but it was full of memories. The old oak tree we'd climbed. Dad's workbench in the basement. The pencil marks on the laundry room wall measuring our height every birthday. Neither of us had been ready to deal with it. Now we had to. I flew to Ohio for the weekend. When I pulled into the driveway, Ethan was already there. He wasn't alone. Linda stood beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to me. I figured you'd need this after the flight. Thanks. There was something different about moments like these now. She offered. She didn't assume. She asked. She didn't direct. Those were small changes. But relationships are often rebuilt through small things. Inside the house, Ethan opened a faded cardboard box labeled Dad's papers. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect. Old insurance policies, tax returns, photographs. Then he pulled out a sealed envelope. Across the front, in our father's handwriting, were 4 words. For my sons. Neither of us remember seeing it before. Ethan carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter. Dad wrote about growing older, about watching us become husbands, about how proud he was that, although we had chosen different paths, we had never stopped being brothers. Then one paragraph caught both of us off guard. Never let peace become the same thing as silence. A peaceful family still speaks honestly. Neither of us said anything, because that single sentence described exactly what had happened to Ethan. He had confused keeping the peace with giving up his voice. After lunch, a local real estate agent arrived to look at the property. She walked through each room, making notes. When she finished, she asked the obvious question. So, what would you both like to do? Years ago, I knew exactly what would have happened. Linda would have answered. This time, she looked at Ethan and waited. He smiled. I'd like to hear everyone's thoughts first. The agent nodded. We spent nearly an hour discussing possibilities. Sell it, rent it, renovate it. Eventually, Ethan looked around the living room. I don't think Mom would have wanted strangers tearing this place apart. I agreed. So what are you thinking? He smiled. I'd like to restore it. I looked at him. Restore it. Not just for us. He glanced toward Dad's old workshop. I want to turn the garage into a community woodworking space. Linda's eyebrows lifted. You've been thinking about this. For months. She smiled. I think it's a wonderful idea. No hesitation. No correction. No list of reasons it wouldn't work. Just support. I noticed Ethan smile without even realizing it. Over the following months, the old house slowly came back to life. Neighbors volunteered. Retired carpenters donated tools. A local hardware store offered discounted materials. Every Saturday morning, the garage filled with people of every age. Teenagers learning to use a saw for the first time. Retirees passing along decades of experience. Parents building birdhouses with their children. One afternoon, I watched Ethan patiently show a nervous 12-year-old how to sand the edge of a small bookshelf. You don't have to rush, he told the boy. Mistakes can usually be fixed. The words weren't just about woodworking. They were about life. Near the end of summer, the community center held its annual volunteer appreciation dinner. Without telling Ethan, several neighbors had nominated him for a local service award. When his name was announced, he looked genuinely shocked. As he walked to the stage, the applause seemed to go on forever. He accepted the plaque, looked out at the crowd, and smiled. I spent a long time believing I didn't have much to offer. He glanced toward Linda, then toward me. I was wrong. This community reminded me that pose doesn't disappear. Sometimes, it just waits for you to believe in it again. The audience stood. Not because he'd built beautiful furniture, because they'd watched him rebuild himself. Driving back to the airport the next morning, Ethan laughed. You know something? What? If you'd told me 2 years ago that I'd be speaking in front of 100 people, I would have hidden in the bathroom. I laughed. I probably would have dragged you out. You would have. He became quiet for a moment. Thank you. For what? For answering the phone that day. I shook my head. You did the hard part. No. He smiled. You reminded me that I still had a choice. As I boarded my flight home, I looked out the terminal window and watched my brother drive away. Not toward someone else's expectations, not toward someone else's approval, but toward a life that finally belonged to him. And somehow, that felt like the most satisfying ending to a story that had once seemed impossible to rewrite. The phone rang on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Ethan, it's me. His voice sounded calm, but I knew him well enough to hear the weight behind it. I got a letter. What kind of letter? An invitation. To what? He let out a slow breath. Our high school's 50th reunion. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he laughed quietly. 30 years ago, I would have found an excuse not to go. And now, I think it's time. A month later, I flew to Ohio so we could attend together. Walking into the old gymnasium felt like stepping back into another lifetime. The basketball court looked smaller. The banners were faded. The trophy case hadn't changed at all. People recognized us immediately. The Carter twins. How are you boys? I still can't tell you apart. The room filled with laughter. It felt good. Normal. Throughout the evening, former classmates shared stories I'd never heard. One woman smiled as she approached Ethan. You probably don't remember me. I'm Susan. You helped me pass algebra. Ethan looked embarrassed. I barely remember my own algebra. She laughed. You stayed after school every Tuesday for 2 months. You wouldn't let me quit. Another classmate joined the conversation. And you organized that charity baseball game after the tornado. Someone else added. You were always the one bringing people together. I watched Ethan's expression change with every story. Piece by piece, strangers were returning memories he'd forgotten about himself. Not because he'd lost them, because he'd stopped believing they mattered. On the drive home, Ethan was unusually quiet. What are you thinking? I asked. He smiled through the windshield. For years, I believed the version of myself I saw every day. And tonight, I met the version everyone else remembered. He looked over at me. I think they're finally becoming the same person. A few weeks later, Ethan called with another surprise. The community workshop is officially a nonprofit. I nearly dropped my coffee. You did it. We did it. Local businesses had donated tools. Retired craftsmen volunteered every weekend. Even the local high school agreed to send students interested in learning woodworking and furniture restoration. What are you calling it? I asked. He smiled. Dad's bench. Because every project starts somewhere. I couldn't think of a better name. One Saturday, I visited during one of the workshops. The place was full. Teenagers were sanding picture frames. A retired Navy veteran was teaching a young couple how to repair a dining chair. In the corner, Carol was helping 2 little girls paint birdhouses. The old garage that had once sat silent for decades echoed with conversation and laughter. Ethan walked through the room answering questions, encouraging beginners, and celebrating every small success. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply being himself. And somehow, that inspired everyone around him. Near the end of the afternoon, Linda arrived carrying a tray of homemade cookies. She set them on the work table. I brought snacks. Nobody made a fuss. Several volunteers thanked her. She smiled, chatted for a while, and then quietly began helping clean up. I noticed something important. She never once interrupted Ethan. She never corrected him. She never answered questions directed at him. Instead, she asked, "Is there anything you'd like me to do?" It was such a simple sentence, yet it represented years of change. Later, as we locked up the workshop, Linda walked over to Ethan. "I know I can't change the past." He nodded. "I know, but I hope I can help build something better." Ethan looked around the workshop, at the benches, the tools, the people still laughing in the parking lot. "I think we already are." That night, the 3 of us sat outside under a clear autumn sky. I thought back to the phone call that had brought me to Ohio more than a year earlier. The tears, the hopelessness, the man who had whispered, "I don't know who I am anymore." That man was gone, not because someone had rescued him, because he had chosen, day after day, to reclaim his own voice. As I looked at my brother, I realized something that no one had understood at the beginning of this journey. Real karma isn't always watching someone lose everything. Sometimes it's watching the truth quietly reshape everyone's life. Linda had to face the consequences of her choices every day. Ethan had to learn to make his own. And both of them understood that trust isn't restored with promises. It's rebuilt through consistent actions. As I finished my coffee, Ethan smiled at me. You know what? I used to think that phone call was the worst day of my life. He looked toward the workshop one last time. Now I think it was the day my real life finally began. Nearly 2 years passed before I truly understood what had changed. It wasn't that Ethan had become a different man. It was that he'd finally stopped asking permission to be himself. That realization came on an ordinary Saturday morning. I was back in Ohio for the dedication of the renovated workshop. What had once been our parents' dusty garage now had a sign hanging above the entrance. Dad's bench. A place to learn. A place to belong. There were no television cameras. No newspaper reporters. Just neighbors. Friends. Former students. Families. The people whose lives had quietly become connected through one man's decision to reclaim his own. Before the ribbon cutting, Carol walked to the front, holding a small envelope. I've lived on this street for 34 years, she said. I've watched children grow up, neighbors come and go, and friendships begin over backyard fences. She smiled at Ethan. But the greatest renovation I've ever seen wasn't this building. She gently placed a hand on his shoulder. It was watching a good man remember who he always was. The crowd applauded. Ethan looked down, embarrassed. Some things about my brother would never change. He never enjoyed being the center of attention. After the ceremony, people wandered through the workshop. A teenage boy proudly showed his parents the coffee table he'd built. An elderly woman picked up a handmade jewelry box and said it reminded her of something her late husband once made. Laughter echoed through the room. The sound bounced off walls that had once known only silence. Standing near the doorway, I noticed Linda. She wasn't organizing. She wasn't directing. She wasn't correcting anyone. She was simply talking with a young volunteer, listening far more than she spoke. When our eyes met, she walked over. I've been thinking about something. What? I spent years believing that if I could control everything, nothing bad would happen. She looked around the room. But life doesn't work that way. No, it never did. She smiled sadly. I wish I'd learned that sooner. I nodded. So does Ethan. She looked toward him. So do I. Later that afternoon, Ethan disappeared into Dad's old office. When I found him, he was holding our father's photograph. You okay? He smiled. I was just imagining what he'd say if he could see this place. What do you think he'd say? He laughed. It's about time you stopped doubting yourself. That sounds exactly like Dad. It does. He carefully placed the photograph back on the shelf. You know, I used to think I lost 30 years. He pouts. Ed, I don't believe that anymore. I waited. I learned something from those years. What? That giving away your voice happens slowly. So does getting it back. That evening, the last volunteer locked the front door and headed home. Only Ethan and I remained. We stood on the front porch of our childhood home, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and gold. I've got something for you, he said. He handed me a small wooden box. I opened it carefully. Inside was a compass, handcrafted from walnut and maple. On the inside of the lid were 6 words burned into the wood. Never lose your own direction. I looked at him. You made this? He nodded. I wanted you to have it. For what? For answering the phone. I smiled. You've thanked me enough. No. He shook his head. I thank you for coming. This is for believing me before I believed myself. Neither of us spoke after that. Some moments don't need words. As I packed to leave the next morning, Ethan walked me to my car. Just like he had so many times before. Only this goodbye felt different. There wasn't any sadness. No uncertainty. No fear about what would happen after I left. He didn't need me to stay anymore. That was the greatest gift I could have hoped for. Before I got into the car, he said one last thing. I've started keeping a journal. I laughed. Really? Yeah. But not to record what I should do. What do you write? He smiled. Whatever I want. It sounded so simple. Yet I knew exactly how much freedom was contained in that sentence. The drive to the airport gave me plenty of time to think. People often imagine karma as something loud. A dramatic confrontation. A public humiliation. A perfect act of revenge. Life rarely works that way. Sometimes karma is much quieter. It's the person who spent years controlling every decision, suddenly realizing they no longer can. It's the person who believed they had nothing left, discovering they still have everything that truly matters. It's a marriage that survives only because both people are finally willing to tell the truth. Most of all, it's finding the courage to become yourself again, no matter how long you've been pretending to be someone else. My brother once called me crying because he believed his life was over. He was wrong. That phone call wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of the first chapter he actually got to write for himself. And if there's one lesson I hope you'll carry with you, it's this. Never confuse keeping the peace with losing your voice. The right people won't ask you to become smaller so they can feel bigger. They'll make room for you to stand beside them, as yourself. Thank you for listening to our story. If it reminded you of someone you know, or if you've ever had to rediscover your own voice, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next true-to-life karma and betrayal story. Take care of yourselves. Until next time, the end.